Today I'm going to share with you my history with my study Ordotics. The word ordotics is spelled Ordotics. Now, where did I come up with that term? Because it's not already a word. It's a word that I invented. So I just said, okay, well, my study is similar to mathematics. Mathematics is based on the root word mathema. Okay, it's Mathema. So that is the first 7 letters of the actual word mathematics. And then in mathematics, you have the letter T, which is a connective word, letter, I should say, to the suffix of the word, which is a Greek word, which is ikos, I-K-O-S. But then, through the years of evolution of words and such, it changed to be, instead of T-I-K-O-S, it's T-I-C-S. The word mathema for mathematics means science, knowledge, a lesson, that which is learnt. Now, ordotics, okay, is the base word is ordo, O-R-D-O, and then it has the connective letter T like mathematics, and then the last I-K-O-S. So I condensed it like they do with mathematics and changed it to T-I-C-S instead of T-I-K-O-S. So it's ordotics, and the word ordo, O-R-D-O, it's a Latin word which has a few different meanings that are similar, but the one I'm just going to let you know is arrangement, okay? Because in the study of ordotics, there's an arrangement of letters to come up with answers. Okay, so it's a very simple, kind of description of the study. And what really attracted me to the word ordo was at the very base of that, the word ord, O-R-D, means origin, the beginning, and my study is very theologically based. It talks about God and different things like that with the answers that it brings out. Just going to give you a brief definition of mathematics and ordotics so you can kind of see the comparison, because with mathematics the base of it is quantitative. It deals with numbers. Okay, the base of ordotics deals with letters. The numbers in mathematics measure the physical aspect of reality. All right, you can go and I take my book usually as an example, Reality Storyline Decoded 2. And you can measure the width and the height, the depth, with a ruler or whatever instrument you have. You can measure the letters, the page height. You can measure the space in between the letters. And you can take all that information down and derive, mathematical equations from it or solutions. But you're not going to understand what the book's about. You just have a bunch of numbers telling you about the physical setting of the book. But it doesn't tell you the storyline of the book. And that's because you have to read the letters. You can't just measure the letters. You have to read the letters. The meaning is infused within those letters. That's a brief example of the difference between mathematics and ordotics. Okay? Math relies heavily on numbers. Ordotics relies heavily on letters. Okay? Alphabetic letters specifically, as I know through my study, it's English, the English alphabet. Okay? So the definition for mathematics this is one definition. It's a science, right, that deals with the relationship and symbolism of numbers and magnitudes, and that includes quantitative operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and the solution of quantitative problems. So your problem is quantitative. It has to do with the number and amount, right? And let's say like 5 plus 3 equals 8. Okay, there you go. There's a math problem. Now, ordotics, I kind of piggybacked off that definition for ordotics to get, something that would be kind of seen as dictionary worthy, I guess, and it's a science. Now, I'm saying it's a science because there's protocols that have to be followed, and they're rigid enough that if you do them over and over and over again, the only way these solutions can come about in the way they do is by following these set of rules consistently. So it's a science that deals with the reorganization and symbolism of letters and alphabetic messages. And that includes decoding operations. My decoding operations would be like query stacks and fate stacks. It includes decoding operations and the revelation of knowledge pertaining to various topics, such as theology, things about God and religion and such. Prophecy, it can be used for prediction. And biography, it talks about things that are historical with people, their experiences. And there's other things that ordotics is used for, but that's just a short listing, okay? So I had mentioned that there's an inverse relationship between mathematics and ordotics. Math deals heavily with numbers, right? But math also has letters. Now, these letters are used as placeholders in mathematics, like in algebra per se. So let's say you have the equation 4 plus x equals 8. Now, that letter x could have been the letter y, it could have been the letter z, it doesn't matter. It's just there's a placeholder for a number, okay? Now, in ordotics, it rests heavily on alphabetical letters, but it also uses numbers, okay? And the number system that it uses is intrinsically tied to the letters. You can't swap out one number for, a different letter like you can with the letters and the numbers with math. The system that it uses is counting from the number 1 to the number 26 in order, and listing the alphabetical letters, the English alphabetical letters from A to Z in series. So A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, so forth and so on, till you get to letter 26, which is Z. Now at that point, it restarts. So if you hit the number 27, it's a letter A, 28B, and then it keeps going again till the number 52, and then restarts again. Now, at the before the number 1 is the number 0. The number 0 equates to the letter O. In ordotics, where you come across a number 0, it becomes the letter O. Math does use symbols like brackets, curly brackets, parentheses. You could have the number 4, and then in parentheses right next to it, you could have the number 8, and that means 4 multiplied by 8 is 32. In ordotics, there's also punctuation, I'll call it, that's used, symbols like the period, which is used to create phrases or sentences, commas, used as separating lists, semicolons, colons have a special purpose, not to go too in deep in this video about, but those are the basic symbols that are used in ordotics, just basic regular grammatical punctuation. That's the basis of ordotics, okay? It's a science that deals with the alphabet, okay? And that alphabet is tied to the storyline of reality. Well, I'm saying there's somebody sitting back who made reality and did it based on a code, not necessarily a computer code, but based on like mathematics would be part of that code, and also ordotics. Mathematics would be building the setting, the physical setting, using numbers primarily, and the storyline of that setting, the events that happen, that's based on the ordotical programming of reality. So, when I was younger, okay, I don't know, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, I enjoyed doing crossword puzzles. I wasn't a fanatic, but I like getting a book with crossword puzzles or word searches and, finding words and playing games like that. All right. Now, when I was, let's say, 15, okay, I started getting interested in playing music and writing songs. I immediately wanted to start writing songs, and so I would write lyrics too. And I started realizing I really liked like poetry, lyrics, and I really liked words. Now, this was back in the early 90s, okay, 91, 1990, around that time. And there was no internet. There was, home computers were pretty much like, sparse. Not a lot of people had them. And so if you wanted to find a definition, you had to go to the physical dictionary. And if you wanted to find a word that was similar and it wasn't listed in the dictionary as a synonym, you had to get an actual thesaurus and open it up and see what words they had in that thesaurus for you. And so when I would write lyrics, I was a freshman in high school, maybe a sophomore. And so, my vocabulary was pretty good. But I mean, there were some words that I never heard before, like manifestation, astronomical, and they just sounded so cool to me, like how they rolled off the tongue. And then I would look it up and, like the thesaurus, if I was writing lyrics, like what's another word for big, right? Like, enormous or titanic or, towering or whatever it is. And I'd be like, ooh, all these words. And better rhymes with something else that I've, had in a previous line of lyrics or whatever it was. And so I got really interested in words that way. And I continued to write poetry and lyrics and music. And when I'd write poetry, I'd be like, oh, I want to kind of make it really difficult to read so it becomes somewhat of a riddle for somebody. They can't just read it and be like, oh, the sky is blue and the clouds are white. Please don't get in a fight. So I don't want it to be like that. I wanted it to be a learning for the person also when they would read the poetry. That's where my interest in words came from. And then when I was about 27, 28, there was a day that I slumped down onto the floor. And then it was like, I almost felt like hollowed out. Like I was sitting like a mile back in my mind looking out my eyes. So it felt more as like looking out a cave. It was like there was symbols in the air, like in the bedroom, just equidistantly spaced apart. And they looked like maybe that big, right? And I can't tell you what those symbols were because I didn't trace them or anything. I just looked. And they were all equidistantly spread apart, all about the same size. They could have been letters. They could have been pictures. I don't remember, or just some type of symbolism. And it was almost like they were like written like on a hazy green color, like on a sheet of glass. So it was like I could see through the letters, but they were still there, like an apparition. Okay, and it was like, I don't know, I'd say like 7 symbols long by maybe 6 or 7 symbols downward. So about 50 symbols, we'll say, up there, maybe 40, right? And I looked, and it was just like I couldn't move. I felt frozen, right? And not like I tried to struggle to move. I just felt comfortable looking, and then it happened for a couple seconds, and then it was like I came to, like I wasn't gone, but it was just like I gained control of my body again, and I stood up, and it was like, okay, what was that? And like I didn't freak out about it. I just had the experience and was like, okay. And I had some other things happen to me, and I just kind of put it in the bag of experiences. And I should mention, when I grew up, the family structure I lived in, we weren't religious. Like I was told I was Roman Catholic, right? But we didn't go to church. We had a Bible sitting on a shelf, and that was it. Nobody opened it. Nobody said, let's talk about the Bible. No, nobody cared, really. My dad had gone to Catholic school. My grandma, so his mom, was very Catholic. She would go to like all the masses and get-togethers at the church and stuff like that. And I went once in a while with her when I'd stay over at her house, but not very often. I'd probably say maybe a total of 5 times that I went with her, that I remember anyway. And so it wasn't really a very big lesson in life to me, religion. The most somebody would say to me, if they said, well, what's a Roman Catholic? I'd be like, I don't know, I believe in God. That's about all I could have told them. I probably couldn't have told them much more. I didn't know anything about the Bible really anyway. So I would say that lasted till I was probably about 16, 17. Then I just didn't care. I didn't think about it, right? I was listening to heavy metal and death metal, and they were talking about Satan and stuff like that. I wasn't worshiping Satan or nothing. I just kind of saw it all as fantasy. I'm like, oh, they're just singing about stuff. Nobody really practices that. Nobody's going out there, sacrificing somebody. Not in the bands anyway. Yeah, there are people that do that, right? But I'm just saying, not these band members and stuff. It's all just like, oh, I'm tougher than you. I believe in Satan. Like, I'm gonna write about him, make some images on an album cover. Okay, so it never affected me in any religious perspective I had, per se. Back to when I'm like 27, 28, I fell down. I had this vision, right, of this matrix of letters. And so I'm like, maybe I need to look within words, right? And so I actually started taking words that seemed to me to be like bigger words, like universe, like bigger conceptual words about life. And I'm like, maybe there's the information I'm looking for is hidden within words. Maybe in the word is a message, not just a meaning, but by changing the letters around, maybe it's like a secret code. Those are called anagrams, when you take letters and you switch letters of a word around to spell another word. Like if you take the word now, N-O-W, you can reverse the spelling and it'd be W-O-N for one, like you win something. or you could take the O and place it before the W before the end to spell the word own, like you possess something, right? And I thought, okay, maybe I can find some answer by doing that. So I was basically atheist from probably my age at that time when I got out of college, 21, 22, till about 28. And that changed. Okay, so I had went from atheist to being agnostic, I would say. Started questioning, is there a God? Because after I started digging into words, I started seeing commands in the words, like the word good, right? And I broke down like, oh, it's go do. And then I'm like, well, if you put that with the word good, it's like go do good, like a moral instruction, right? And then if you use the word evil, you could say veil, V-E-I-L, veil evil, which would be, instead of going to do it, hide it away, conceal it, don't show it, right? Now, the word evil can also be vile, right? So I thought, oh, it's kind of like veil, vile evil, because vile means ill or disreputable. I had broke apart some of these words and started seeing commands in them and different things like that. And they were, basically moral commands or kind of just logical phrases. Like if you use the word one, W-O-N. And like I said, it's either the word now, N-O-W, or own, O-W-N. So if you win something, right, it's yours. So you could take those three words and build a logical phrase by saying one. So you just won something, W-O-N. One, comma, now own, right? You won it, now you own it. There is a radio program I listen to called Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. And they would talk about all these different topics. One night it might be witches. They'll have a witch on talking about witchcraft and what witchcraft really is. And then the next night they might be talking about somebody that had a UFO abduction case, or somebody, the next one might be somebody that was in the military, part of a remote viewing project, high classified stuff back in the 60s and 70s. So I was listening one night, and back in like the mid 1900s, I'm getting like 1940s to 1950s, there was a rabbi from Prague, Czechoslovakia, and his name is the letter H, the letter M, the letter D, so like initials HMD Weismandel. And he was, I don't know if it was a happen chance studying the Torah. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Okay, it's the first 5 books of the Bible. Okay, and the Torah, in Judaism, the belief is that Moses used Hebrew letters and wrote the Torah out in series of letters, not like, oh, I'm going to make this chapter about this and this chapter about that, and then this chapter will go over here. He wrote the whole book out letter by letter in order without mistake or without error. So it's seen in Judaism as, not just a holy book, but a holy written book, right? So a divinely inspired book down to the letter level, each single letter and their placement. So not only do you have a story that's seen in Judaism to be, accurate, 100% true, right? It's also the placement of the letters, which are 100% true. So you not only have a storyline, you now have space and where those letters are, right? Okay. So HMD Weismandel, the rabbi, skipped 50 Hebrew letters in Genesis. So he started with, I believe it's the first letter, he skipped 50 letters, and then the second letter, he skipped 50 letters, then the third letter. And when he did that 5 times, it spelled out the word Torah. And he saw that as significant. And so he did that in 3 of the other 5 books, and the same thing happened. So then that must, at that point, I'm kind of extrapolating. He must have conferred with other rabbis or whatever it may be, and maybe they started looking at different skip patterns. Okay, so that became known as equidistant letter sequencing. In this radio program of the Art Bell episode, and this book was written in 1998, the Bible Code, I'm going to read this quote from the Bible Code book, okay? So it kind of gives an idea of how serious they took the Bible Code. Okay, so the code was discovered by Dr. Eli Rips, one of the world's leading experts in group theory. He discovered the code, not necessarily the skip pattern of the 50, but then once they started realizing that, they started skipping at different letter amounts, and then they would line those up and spell words that crossed over them. Okay, I'll explain that in a second. So he was a world's leading expert in group theory, a field of mathematics that underlies quantum physics, like atoms, neutrons, protons, stuff like that. It has been confirmed by famous mathematicians at Harvard, Yale, and Hebrew University. So it has been replicated by a senior code breaker at the U.S. Department of Defense, so they at least replicated what was being done. That doesn't mean necessarily that they said it's true. They just said they're replicating. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying based on the information. And it has passed 3 levels of secular peer review at a leading U.S. math journal. The Bible code, let me just show you an example, would be, let's say, and this isn't necessarily saying Torah, but these are Hebrew letters, okay? And see how they're equidistantly spread apart? So it goes across and they're in columns and rows, okay? And then those Hebrew letters, which are, circled or whatever they are in triangles, those, if they're in circles, those letters go together. If they're in squares, those letters go together. If they're in triangles, those letters go together, and each one spells a word. And if you noticed, I should show this too, like in this one, you can see all the letters and how many are actually circled, right? A very small portion. There's probably like 18, 20 letters there, Hebrew letters circled, and the rest are not used. In this computer program that they made for the Bible code, you could plug in a word, right? I could plug in my name, David Mivshek, right? And then I could choose how many letters across is on a row, right? So let's say I want 40 letters across, 40 Hebrew letters across. It'll stack the first 40 letters of Genesis, then the next 40 letters of Genesis, then the next 40 letters of Genesis, so forth and so on. And it'll look for those patterns for the name within the letters based on the row and height. So you could expand and make the rows 80 letters long or 120, and it'll just change the grid pattern where those letters are located. But if you have hundreds of thousands of letters, you could go from 5-letter rows to 180 letter rows to 1,000 letter rows, and you can find basically amongst all those letters anybody's name at some point, just based on quote-unquote randomness, right? Just by letters matching up because they just happen to, because there's so many letters. Somebody's name is going to pop up at some point, right? And some information will seem like it belongs, and that was just kind of, the criticism of it. Anyway, that kind of gave me a structure of words in a matrix, and that's what I grabbed from the Bible code. When I was listening to Art Bell, Nighttime Talk Radio, there was a guest on there. His name was Whitley Strieber. So he started his own podcast after being on the Art Bell Show how many times. And on January 15th in 2005, he had a guest on. His name was Mark Provo, Provo. And he introduced a concept he called mathistry, mathestry, almost like tapestry and math together. Mathistry. And when I was listening to it, I was very interested because he was counting headline letters, and he was attaching numbers to the letters to show how that became something to do with a story that was being told in the newspaper. And the one he was doing was 9/11. And I don't remember the exact way he did it, but it was basically by using different headlines or something, he was showing how they always equal 911, I believe is what it was. But I was very interested in, he was assigning A to the number 1, B to the number 2, C to the number 3, and he called it a mod 26. And I'm like, okay, so each letter is, 1 is A, 2 is B, so forth and on to Z, right? And he would tie that to the news events. I'm like, oh, he's tying it to something real world, like that's happening, and I can see an example, right? Now, in my mind, I thought, well, that could mean there's hundreds of examples that don't work, too. When I learned about the mod 26 from Mark Provo through Mathistry, I thought, what about if instead of trying to predict numbers, I make each number of the lottery a letter, right? Because I thought if I was going to take lottery numbers and try to predict lottery numbers so I could go win the actual lottery anytime I wanted to, then I would have to I would have to do math, a lot of math, right? Like, if the first number is 1, the second number is 8, is that 1 plus 7 equals 8? And then if the next number is 22, how does that figure in? I'm like, I'm okay with math, but at a certain level, I'm not going to know what the hell I'm doing. I'm going to get lost with all these numbers and go crazy. I'm like, but if I could change those to letters and read it, right? Maybe there's a message through the letters. And so I actually got a lottery ticket, and I have that ticket. I'll have to grab it for another episode. But I put on there random. I took like the number 18, the number 1 for A, 18 is R, number 1 for A, number 14 for N, so forth and so on for the word random. And I went and I bought the ticket, and I thought, what if, okay, you have all these numbers, right, being picked for lotteries, and there's these balls that drop in a machine and they get vacuumed out and it pops up. Well, at any time that number can be manipulated. You don't know it's really random, right? If a human's not programming it, maybe that can be kind of like influenced by a divine being. You could actually then use that whole number selection system that the lottery has to give messages, right? Because nobody knows it would be being manipulated for messages. They would just be picking numbers, losing most of the time, and going on with their life. I'm like, well, hold on. Let me treat it like if it was something I could feed into information and it'll spit back out an answer like a machine, right? So I'm feeding in this card that says through the numbers random. It's going through. There's some type of divine being somewhere that's like able to pull and be like, okay, and then put out a message. Not saying that it's always that way, but if somebody intentionally wants to do it, and if there's a being looking over my shoulder watching, knowing I'm going to do it, then maybe that being would do something. Now I should say, before I put in the one that was random, I just went and I got a ticket, and I still have this ticket too. And this was like 2005. And when I got the ticket, I didn't choose any letters at the time. I'm like, what about if I just go and I pick any numbers and see what the actual winning lotto numbers will be? And I'll attach letters to them. And so I did that. And while I was walking to get that ticket, I had met somebody on New Year's Eve that year. And it was a friend of a friend's sister who was having a party at their trailer for New Year's Eve. And her name was Jamie, right? And she worked at this telemarketing place. And I didn't know this. I met her, we talked, 20 minutes, at her house, whatever. And I was hanging out with my friend and whatever. I didn't know anything really about her life story. Anyway, I was walking to the gas station to get the ticket. And on the way to get the ticket, she was outside of a building. She was standing outside smoking a cigarette. And I'm like, Jamie? And she's like, oh, hey. I'm like, what are you doing here? And we gave each other a hug. It was just like a friendly hug, like, hey, how's it going? Oh, I work here, she told me. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to the gas station to buy a lotto ticket, basically. And so, it was, just happened. It was kind of out of the blue. Never saw her there before, never met her before New Year's Eve. It was like a couple weeks after, probably. And when the winning numbers came out for that drawing, I transferred them to letters, and it was an H, a U, a G for hug, and then J-A-M for Jamie. It wasn't necessarily in that order, but those are the letters. And when I looked at it, I'm like, it's like hug Jame. Like almost, it's jam, okay, I'll admit that, but it was something that just occurred when I was like going to get the ticket, right? The only thing that happened type deal. So I'm like, okay, that's when I'm like, I'm going to now intentionally put a message onto the ticket based on the numbers. I know it sounds crazy, right? But I'm going to try it. And so I spelled out the word random, as I mentioned, and fed it into the system. And the winning numbers for that spelt not necessarily in this order. The letter I, the letter S, the letter R, the letter E, the letter A, the letter L for is real. Okay? And I'm like, oh, wait. Random is real. Wait a second. If random is real, then it wouldn't be giving me that message because it wouldn't be random. So it was almost like somebody kind of tricking in a way to give them the right message, to be like, oh, random, oh yeah, it's real. Kind of like that, like, because that's what the letters said. And I'm like, well, I didn't necessarily believe. I just thought, well, there's a better chance. The hug James thing seems weird enough. and L is real. Like it's kind of playing a game, like kind of like the opposite. So I'm going to keep going with that. And I did. And so what I did was I got all the numbers from the Powerball from the first drawing ever and went in order and listed all the drawings and transferred them all to letters. And then found out that there was basically a verse pattern, like almost like poetry. Like, and it's not like, oh, you find a pattern here and there because you believe it's there. No, I actually have the pattern, right? It's spelled out. And then it's past that, there's another system that I got it to where you put the letters through a cycle based on certain letters that are in there. Like F is kind of mathematical. F means function. There's strings of letters, and there's letters I'm not going to give it all away, but there's letters attached to groups of letters. That means like it's in its second turn, and then the third turn, and then it's gone. It's almost like this, like 3 holding tanks based on how these string of letters are connected. And that means like if you're predicting, these letters are not going to be used anymore for the next drawing type deal. Now, have I won the lottery? I got it to a certain point that I haven't totally figured out the system, right? But just like any type of math problem that's out there in mathematics, they don't have all the answers. They have certain equations, and through the years they develop it. They get rid of some ideas, and some new ones come around, and some work and some don't. I just thought to myself, I'm like, okay, if there's a God, okay, if God can hear me think, because why would I have to talk for God to hear me? God could hear me think, right? If God could hear me think, well, I would ask God, like if I had a chance to talk to God or ask God a question, only one question though, what would it be? And I thought I'd ask God, do you know what your own origin is, God? And so I had that in my mind, and I thought, if you can hear me, God, whatever it is, give me some type of answer. And I thought, I don't want an answer like a glowing tree. That's not going to help me. A glowing tree, and then nobody believes you. Or I don't want it to be a voice in my head that gives me an answer, right? That I can't reproduce because now I'm crazy if I do that. So I wanted something that was evidential that I could prove, I could show somebody else. And so I thought, okay, God, what is your origin? Do you know? Am I stumping you with that one? And I just laid my head on the bed, and then I had a vision. I know I was thinking this topic already, but I'm telling you, I know my thoughts and how they work. And this was not a thought I put in my head. It was just like a movement of letters across from if you can imagine your mind, it's basically infinite. There's no space in there when you use your imagination, right? There's no boundary. But it's almost like you only see like a movie screen size area, let's say, in your mind. And it was like it was moving from right to left, and there were 3 words stacked upon each other, and it said God, heaven, and origin. And the letters were lined up, and they were stacked neatly on top of each other. They stopped in the middle of my mental screen. And then it was like, I just had this want to write it down, right? Because I was like, it sat there for like a second or two, and I'm like, the words, I'm like, I want to write those words down. And so I grabbed a pencil and a piece of paper, and I wrote them down, and I thought, what is that for? God, heaven, origin. I'm like, okay, God of heaven, right? We're talking about the God of heaven, no other God we're talking about. And what is the origin? That's my question, right? That's my question. What do I do with this information? Why am I spreading the letters out equidistantly? And I thought of the Bible code. I'm like, what about there's a code in there? What about if there's information stored within this matrix of letters? I started connecting the letters, and I was doing it like the Bible code, diagonally back and forth. And I realized I had leftover letters, and I thought, if there was a message in here and God gave it to me and I was to use this as evidence, I cannot show it to somebody and have all these leftover letters unused, because then they'll be like, well, why didn't you use the other letters? You just found words in there that you liked and you wrote them down, right? And I'm like, so from that I developed the system for query stacks, which is on the top row word you have a biblical character, in this instance God. In the second row you have the realm that biblical character is noteworthy and most notable in, which is for God is heaven, right? And then origin for the beginning of God. And then as I was doing it, I just had these movements where it was like not necessarily physical, but mental movements and intuitions that brought me to the next step, right? And it was like, I thought the whole time, I'm like, I'm either going down a stairway into the basement of craziness or something's developing here, right? And I was thinking more of the stairway to the basement of craziness. I put it worst case scenario because I thought when I get to the bottom, if I'm crazy, at least I know how I got there and I can work my way back out. So as I was doing it, I was connecting the letters and I started developing rules. You can only connect the letters left and right or up and down or horizontally or vertically, but not diagonally. Because I realized when I was connecting them diagonally that I was getting all these leftover letters trapped underneath the diagonal in the straight line that I couldn't use in any way. So I'm like, I'll just keep going with these rules. And basically through this, I developed this system, which I show them this in episode 3. I implore you to go back because I go through this whole query stack and the answer and everything. But as you can see, the letters are connected only, and I box them in horizontally, like go, he, and or vertically, D and A, and horizontally, A to V, but never just diagonally, like the D and the V. The D and V are connected in the same word because of the letter A. They're both connected to that. So then I said, okay, well, I have to use every letter, which you can see here I did. And then every letter can only be used once. So you can't just overlap and use that letter again because you need it, right? So that told me when I did that, you can see biblical character, location, the word origin. And then as I was doing it, I don't really know what drove me to do it. It was just like intuition, like I said. It was like, what am I trying to do here? I'm trying to get the answer. I kind of saw like a math problem, like an addition problem where you have like 3 numbers and then the addition line underneath that they're stacked vertically, like 8 with the plus sign, 2 plus sign, 4 with a line. And I saw that line as answer, okay? Looking for the answer, and I wrote that down, the word answer. And that's when the message developed, which is, and you take out these words from top left to bottom right. So if you take out the word go, it's poof, it's gone. Now you go to the D. Now I got the word Dave, poof, it's gone. Then the word he, poof, it's gone. So forth and so on. And when you take out a block of letters, you can anagrammatize them so it fits in the sentence. I know that sounds subjective, but if you're writing a sentence or doing even a math problem like 4 plus x equals 8, you can try the number 9 in x, you can try the number 2 in x, you can try the number 3. The only number that's going to work in that placeholder x is the number 4. Okay, so you can try different things till you get the one that makes sense in the sentence, right? Or else it's not going to be a sensible sentence. So you take them out from top left to bottom right, which further reduces the chance that a decoder can just make any message they want. They're using every letter once. They can't use letters that are not there, so they can't just make up words they want. And they have to use vowels because every word has vowels in it. And so if you use a vowel, you have to make sure you use enough consonants around it to build a word and not leave over a lot of consonants, or else you're not going to be able to spell a word and then you got leftover letters, okay? So the phrase ended up being go Dave, he, winner, or gains, right? So you see the word Dave, which was a personal message for me, right? And that came along with an impactful moment that I experienced, which then made me think 90% believing that there is a God. I asked a question to God, can you tell me your origin? And within those words, which have been around for millennia, right? They've gone from one spelling to another, from one type of alphabet to another. And yet, when I did this code breaking, it came out not only with a message about me, the person decoding it, right, which is interesting. It came out with like words like Dave and the pronoun he, right? And to say go Dave, she should do this, or go Dave, the goat said that. It's go Dave, he, right? So it's actually reinforcing the message within itself. And then it's using synonymous words like winner and gains, and with the word or in between. So it's like go Dave, continue to go, doing what you're doing and searching the way you're searching. He or me, you, if this was God talking, like you will win or you will succeed and you will gain from that knowledge, whatever it is, success somehow. And winner, generally when you win something, you gain something. So it's synonymous again. So it's a message that reinforces itself with its own words. It's not like it said, go Dave, keep running down the road and, you'll find a blade of grass or something like that. So it was like bread. It's like a breadcrumb was thrown out into a trail. Like, I'm not going to tell you where I came from. If I came from anywhere, David, you have to now go to the next breadcrumb and you have to figure out what this message is, like a riddle, right? And so you can see in the back, I give 3 more examples. This is just on the back cover and some more answers here. And all these answers and these techniques for query stacks follow the same type of construction, decoding. It's nothing new each time. It's the same decoding pattern, the decoding process, I should say, and the same pattern for the answers and how letters are laid out and what type of words can be used in the answers, so forth and so on. It's very meticulous. It's not like I'm trying to get away with stuff, trying to convince you of things. I'm going to wrap this up. Ordotics is basically a science that I developed that bears out information that an onlooker can observe and see the consistency in the process, and then has to wonder, how could it be there? How could this information be in those words? And I show how when you do people's last names and you put them in a group and you decode their last names, it turns out to be information about the event they were a part of, right? And in query stacks, it's information that either has to do with the decoder, has to do with God, or has to do with the decoding process. That's basically the messages that come out. If the information's really in there and it's not the decoder subjectively putting that information in there, right, convincing themselves it's real, then there's only one way it could be tied into these words. Again, words developed over thousands of years. Humans did not decide to have this code put into the words or into their own last names. Last names changed over time, people getting married, people dropping consonants and vowels, different things out of their names getting mistaken, coming to a different country and things like that. Humans didn't plan for all that, right? And somebody may say, well, maybe an extraterrestrial did. Well, if an extraterrestrial did, then they'd have to develop not only the people with the names, they'd have to develop like the vocal cords too, and sound, and the ability to write. You might as well just say that the extraterrestrials would be supernatural beings that would be basically God. Building a computer program, in a sense, reality program, right? That spits out physical instead of just 2-dimensional type settings and storylines on a screen, spitting up 3-dimensional storylines and settings, which is what we experience. So I just look at it like I'm a created being and I'm doing the things that are part of a script. So this basically, Ordotics is a great way to provide evidence beyond faith. I'm not saying the Bible's not necessary, because a lot of the information corroborates information in the Bible. There is another book that I wrote in the mid-2000s, early like 2008 or 2009, called Storyline Decoded. This is kind of the same thing. It's all like charts and diagrams and things, but I had so many different code ideas, right, that I was starting to come up with. It wasn't like, oh, I did one and then I did the other. It was like a conglomeration of all this stuff, and I would sit there. I took a day or 2 without sleeping, and like, I'm just doing this. I don't even think I ate. This first one has a lot of mistakes in it, because I did everything as quick as I could to get it on paper, recorded, in case I needed it, in case I lost information on a computer or something. So I had it as some type of database. And it goes through different code ideas. I talk about the lotto code in here at the end. Like, this is the chapter dedicated to the lotto code, where I took numbers and transferred them into letters. Thanks for watching. That was the history of Ordotics in as short a period of time as I could do it. Thank you.